Uncontacted tribes. How is that even possible? Whether you come as a friend or an enemy, to them, it makes no difference. But here is the question that should stop you cold. These peoples have never met each other. They are separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean, jungle, and centuries of isolation. They share no language, no trade routes, no messengers. And yet, they arrived at the same weapons, the same social structures, the same logic, the same answer. How do you independently solve the same problem in exactly the same way without ever knowing the other person existed? That is what this video is really about. Let's start from the very beginning, from the thing nobody usually talks about. These tribes are not relics of some parallel evolution. They didn't accidentally get stuck in the Stone Age. They didn't miss the bus to civilization. They are the same Homo sapiens as you and me. Same brain, same neural architecture, same capacity for abstract thought, language, social bonds, emotion. Genetically, they are us, just a different road. Roughly 70,000 years ago, a small group of people left Africa. A handful. Some estimates put the number at just a few thousand individuals. They moved along the coastline, crossed straits that no longer exist, and began spreading across the planet. That migration lasted tens of thousands of years. People went east, north, south. They crossed mountain ranges, crossed seas on primitive rafts. Around 60 to 65,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Andamanese, among them the people we now call the Sentinelese, reached the Andaman Islands. They settled there and were eventually cut off from the rest of humanity by rising sea levels. The ancestors of the Waorani reached Amazonia through an entirely different route, across the Bering Land Bridge, down through the Americas, into the impenetrable green lungs of the planet. Two peoples, two opposite ends of the Earth, no contact with each other for tens of thousands of years. And here is the critical distinction that most coverage of this topic misses entirely. Uncontacted is not one single thing. It describes several very different situations. Some peoples, like the Sentinelese, have had no meaningful contact with the outside world for tens of thousands of years. They are the deepest form of isolation we know of. Others, like the Tagariri and Taromanani, splinter groups of the Waorani, actually did have contact with the outside world. They saw what it brought, and they deliberately walked back into the forest, forever. Some don't know what's out there. Others know, and that is precisely why they refuse. Today, between 100 and 150 such groups exist worldwide. More than half are in the Amazon basin. The rest are scattered across New Guinea, the Andaman Islands, and pockets of Southeast Asia. All of them are different, and all of them independently arrived at strikingly similar answers to the same questions. That is not a coincidence. That is the story. North Sentinel Island, a small island roughly 72 square kilometers in the Andaman Sea, almost entirely covered in dense forest, ringed by coral reefs that make landing nearly impossible. From the air, just a green rectangle in a blue ocean. And here we need to be completely honest about something. North Sentinel is one of the least studied places on Earth. Not a single scientist or anthropologist has ever set foot on it. Everything we think we know about the Sentinelese comes from distant observation, aerial photography, observations from boats kept at a safe distance, and a handful of documented contact incidents. That's it. We don't know what they call themselves. We don't know their language. The few words that were recorded during brief encounters in the 1990s cannot be decoded even when compared to the languages of neighboring Andamanese peoples, which means their isolation was so complete and lasted so long that their language diverged entirely. It belongs to no known family. We don't know how many of them there are. Estimates range from 50 to 500. What we do know with documented certainty is the following. Every attempt at contact has ended the same way. Boats approaching the shore were met with arrows. Helicopters were driven off with hurled spears. In 1974, a National Geographic film crew approached by boat. The director took an arrow to the thigh. In 2006, 2 fishermen whose boat drifted to the island overnight were killed. In 2018, a young American missionary named John Allen Chow paid local fishermen to take him illegally to the island. He was killed the following day. These are confirmed facts. In 2004, when the Indian Ocean tsunami struck, one of the most devastating in modern history, Indian military helicopters flew over the Andaman Islands the next day to assess damage. Over North Sentinel, they reported seeing Sentinelese on the beach, very much alive, shooting arrows at the helicopter. The tsunami had not destroyed them. How they survived, we genuinely don't know. We can reasonably speculate that indigenous peoples with millennia of connection to a specific coastline likely recognize warning signs, changes in animal behavior, unusual tidal patterns that modern people would miss. This same pattern has been observed and documented among other Andamanese peoples and among indigenous communities in Thailand and Sri Lanka during the same tsunami. It is a reasonable inference for the Sentinelese, but we did not observe it directly. We only saw the result. They were alive. And furious, as always. Now, here is what we must not do. We must not fill in the blanks about the Sentinelese with assumptions, however educated. Their inner life, their cosmology, their mythology, these are genuinely unknown. What we can do is look at the documented behavior, the consistency of their rejection of contact, the precision of their territorial defense, the apparent health and continuity of the group, and ask what it tells us. And then look at another people we know far more about and find the same patterns. Now to the other side of the world, Ecuador, Amazonia. Jungle where it rains almost every day and the temperature never drops below 25 degrees even at night. This is where the Waorani live. The word Waorani in their language means simply people. Everyone else is Kauri, outsiders, non-people. This is not arrogance. It is a worldview in which the line between us and them is absolute. The Waorani are far better documented than the Sentinelese because part of them did eventually enter contact with the outside world, mostly after the 1950s. This process was not smooth. In 1956, 5 American missionaries, Jim Elliot, Pete Fleming, Ed McCully, Roger Udarian, and Nate Saint, landed on a sandbar on the Curaray River. They spent several days dropping gifts from the air, a knife, a bowl, a flashlight. The local Waorani seemed to respond. One man even took a ride in the plane. Then they killed all 5 with spears. This was not spontaneous violence. It was a deliberate decision. 2 years later, Elizabeth Elliot, sister of one of the slain, returned, not with weapons. She came with 2 Waorani women who already had outside experience and simply began living alongside the community. It took years, but part of the Waorani eventually accepted contact. What we learned from those who did open up is extraordinary. We have documented language, cosmology, medicinal knowledge, social structure. The Waorani became one of the most studied Amazonian peoples precisely because contact finally became possible with some of them. But not all. The Tagaeri and Taromane, direct descendants of those who refused, remain completely isolated to this day. When oil companies began pushing roads into their territory in the 1970s, they did not negotiate. They disappeared deeper into the forest. Sometimes they come back with spears. Several oil workers and missionaries have been killed at the edges of their territory over the past decades. And now, look at what we know about the Waorani and compare it to what we can observe about the Sentinelese from the outside. Two peoples who have never had any contact with each other, and the parallels are not superficial. This is the heart of the whole story, and it is genuinely one of the most fascinating phenomena in all of human science. It is called convergent cultural evolution, and it works like this. Take two completely isolated groups of people, put them in different parts of the world, give them the same fundamental challenges. How do I feed myself? How do I protect my territory? How do I keep my group cohesive? How do I pass knowledge to the next generation? And then watch what happens. They arrive at the same answers. Not because they communicated, not because one copied the other, but because the problems are the same. The human brain is the same, and the laws of physics and biology are the same everywhere on Earth. Think about it this way. A dolphin and a shark look almost identical in body shape. They are not remotely related. One is a mammal, one is a fish. They evolved from completely different ancestors over hundreds of millions of years on completely separate evolutionary paths. But they both ended up streamlined and torpedo-shaped because water is the same everywhere. And when you need to move fast through water, physics leaves you a limited set of solutions. You will find them, regardless of where you start. Culture works exactly the same way. The bow and arrow, independently invented on multiple continents by peoples who had no contact with each other. Africa, Europe, the Americas, Asia. The same basic mechanism, tension stored in a flexible material released to propel a projectile, appeared again and again because it is close to the optimal solution for the problem of killing something at a distance before it can reach you. The physics of it doesn't care who you are or where you live. The blowgun with poison. Here is a more specific example that should genuinely astonish you. Blowguns with paralyzing plant-based poison were independently developed in two completely separate parts of the world, the Amazon basin and the rainforests of Southeast Asia, Borneo, Malaysia, the Philippines. Two groups of people with zero contact with each other, living on opposite sides of the planet, both arrived at the same sophisticated weapon. Same principle, same application, same basic design. Why? Because the problem was the same. You live in dense jungle. Your prey is in the canopy 30 meters above you. You need to kill it without making noise, because noise scatters everything else. You need the kill to be certain, because you may not get another shot. You have access to specific plants whose compounds cause muscle paralysis. The solution writes itself. The Waorani's curare, prepared from a precise blend of plants through a process passed down through generations, is so pharmacologically sophisticated that it became the basis for modern surgical muscle relaxants used in operating rooms around the world. Pharmaceutical companies spent years trying to synthesize what Amazonian people had engineered through centuries of empirical knowledge. Group size. Here is one that is less obvious but equally striking. Almost every documented hunter-gatherer society in every part of the world organizes itself into groups of roughly the same size, between 100 and 250 people. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar studied this pattern across hundreds of cultures and connected it to neuroscience. The human brain, he argued, can maintain stable social relationships with roughly 150 individuals. More than that, and the social fabric begins to break down. Less than that, and the group lacks the critical mass for collective knowledge and defense. The Waorani live in this range. Based on aerial observation, the Sentinelese appear to as well. So do the Kawahiva of Brazil. So do the isolated peoples of New Guinea. So did virtually every pre-agricultural human society we have studied. They didn't agree on this. They didn't read Dunbar. They just ran the experiment for thousands of years,
and discovered independently that this is the size that works. The shaman. In virtually every isolated culture ever documented, on every continent, in every climate, there is one figure who combines the functions of healer, keeper of collective memory, spiritual authority, and social arbitrator. We call this figure a shaman, a medicine man, a witch doctor, a wise woman. The name changes, the function is always the same. This role was independently invented everywhere because every human group has the same needs: someone who understands medicinal plants, someone who manages the relationship between the living and the dead, someone who resolves conflicts through authority that isn't purely physical. The brain that creates this role is the same brain everywhere. The problems that require it are the same everywhere. Animism. The belief that the natural world is inhabited by spirits, that animals, plants, rivers, and mountains are not inert objects but living presences with their own agency, appears independently in the documented belief systems of isolated peoples on every inhabited continent. It is the default human relationship with nature when you live inside it rather than above it. Among the Wairani, this is richly documented. The forest is alive. Animals carry spiritual weight. Illness is not merely physical, it has a social and spiritual dimension. The relationship between humans and the ecosystem is reciprocal, not extractive. We cannot say this about the Sentinelese specifically, because we have never spoken with them, but the broader pattern across all isolated peoples is so consistent that it constitutes one of the strongest arguments in anthropology. Animism is not a quirk of particular cultures, it is the baseline human relationship with the natural world.
Let's go one level deeper, because convergent evolution alone doesn't fully explain this. There is something more fundamental underneath. All of these peoples face the same irreducible set of challenges, and those challenges are not cultural, they are biological and physical. Challenge 1. Feeding a group in a wild environment. Whether you are in the Amazon, on an island in the Andaman Sea, in the forests of New Guinea, or on the steppes of Siberia, the problem of obtaining food from a wild environment produces a narrow set of viable solutions. You need weapons that are effective at range, silent enough not to scatter prey, reliable enough to produce a kill. You need knowledge of seasonal patterns, when and where animals move, when plants fruit, where fish gather. You need a division of labor that is efficient without being rigid. The solutions that work, the bow, the blowgun, collective hunting, seasonal migration, are not arbitrary cultural choices. They are close to optimal solutions for the underlying physics and ecology. Different peoples arrived at them because different peoples faced the same constraints.
Challenge 2. Defending territory in a world without courts or police. When there is no state, no legal system, no higher authority to appeal to, the defense of territory depends entirely on the credibility of the threat you project. A group that responds to intrusion hesitantly invites more intrusion. A group that responds to intrusion immediately, decisively, and lethally teaches its neighbors a lesson that does not need to be repeated. This is not savagery. It is the logic of deterrence, the same logic that governs the foreign policy of nuclear states today. The difference is only in the instruments. Both the Sentinelese and the Wairani independently arrived at a policy of absolute, non-negotiable territorial defense. Not because they are uniquely violent peoples, but because in the absence of other mechanisms, this is what works.
Challenge 3. Keeping a small group coherent over generations. A group of 200 people living in isolation needs internal mechanisms to prevent the concentration of power, resolve conflicts without destroying social bonds, and transmit accumulated knowledge across generations. These are hard problems, and the solutions, the shaman, the elder council, the oral tradition, the ritual, appear independently everywhere because they are the solutions that work at this scale. The moment a small group develops a tyrant, someone who concentrates resources and coerces others, the group becomes fragile. The historical record of hunter-gatherer societies shows a remarkably consistent response: collective suppression of dominance behavior. Mockery, ostracism, and in extreme cases, killing of individuals who threaten the group's horizontal structure. Christopher Boehm, who studied this across hundreds of societies, called it reverse dominance hierarchy. The group keeps itself flat, not through ideology, but through self-interest. Everyone has more to gain from equality than from being subject to a tyrant.
We need to address the thing that makes most people uncomfortable about these tribes: They kill people who approach them, consistently, without negotiation, without warning. We call this aggression, we call it hostility, we call it primitive. But look at it from the other direction. The Waorani have a documented oral history of what happens when outsiders arrive. The rubber barons of the late 19th century didn't come to trade, they came to enslave. Indigenous Amazonians were kidnapped, worked to death on rubber plantations, and killed if they resisted. This is not a contested historical claim. It is documented in the records of the rubber companies themselves. The Sentinelese have no written history. We cannot know exactly what they remember. But we do know what happened to other Andamanese peoples when contact was made. In the 19th century, British officer Maurice Vidal Portman removed several Sentinelese individuals from the island, taking them to Port Blair for study. The adults died rapidly from exposure to disease. Only 2 children survived long enough to be returned to the island. That is the documented record of what outside contact produced.
That experience, and everything like it, is not stored in books for these peoples. It is stored in behavior, in the reflex, in the hand that reaches for the bowstring when a shape appears on the horizon. What we call aggression is, from their perspective, a survival protocol that has been tested and validated over generations. Every people that entered sustained contact with expanding civilizations went through catastrophe. The Arawak, the first people Columbus met in the Caribbean, were completely destroyed within decades. The Tasmanian Aboriginals, gone by 1876. The peoples of North America lost between 70 and 90% of their population. The mechanism varied: disease, direct killing, enslavement, ecological destruction, but the outcome was always the same. The Sentinelese and the peoples like them are not reacting irrationally to a benign world. They are reacting rationally to a world that has, every time it came into contact with peoples like them, produced catastrophe. The aggression is the memory, and the memory is correct.
But reducing their lives to a defensive posture would be as wrong as calling them simply aggressive. What drives them positively? What makes this not just survival, but life? Belonging. In a group of 1 to 200 people living in one place across generations, there is no anonymity, no loneliness in a crowd, no existential question of who am I? You are the son of this person, the hunter who brought down a tapir yesterday, the woman who knows which bark cures fever. Every person in your world knows your name and your story. Research consistently identifies the sense of belonging as one of the most powerful predictors of subjective well-being across cultures, not wealth, not technology, belonging. The epidemic of loneliness in modern industrialized societies, documented, measurable, and growing, does not exist in communities structured this way. It cannot exist. The social fabric is too tight. Meaning. Every day of a hunter-gatherer's life contains concrete, tangible, non-abstract meaning. Going out to hunt means your children eat. Teaching your son to draw a bowstring means giving him the tools to survive. Gathering plants means your group makes it through the dry season. The meaning is not a philosophical question. It is built into the structure of the day. The crisis of meaning, existential depression, the feeling of pointlessness, the question, what is any of this for, is a specific affliction of societies where basic needs are automatically met and purpose must be constructed rather than simply lived. Time. Anthropologist Marshall Solins, studying hunter-gatherer labor patterns across multiple cultures, reached a conclusion that permanently unsettled the comfortable narrative of progress. The average hunter-gatherer spends roughly 3 to 5 hours per day obtaining food. The rest is social connection, ritual, play, storytelling, rest. Solins called these societies the original affluent society, not because they had many possessions, but because they had few desires that could not be satisfied. We work 8, 10, 12 hours a day to buy things we don't need to impress people we barely know. They hunt for 4 hours and spend the rest of the day with the people they love. The question of who is better off is not as obvious as we were taught. Knowledge as a living library. Among the Waorani, as with most isolated Amazonian peoples, ecological knowledge is accumulated over millennia and transmitted orally. Which plant stops bleeding? Where on the river fish gather in which season?
how to read the behavior of a jaguar, what the sound of a particular bird means about the weather. This is not folklore. This is a functioning scientific knowledge base built through thousands of years of empirical observation, tested against reality every single day. The Amazon jungle contains roughly 80,000 species of plants. A tiny fraction has been scientifically cataloged. Indigenous peoples carry detailed working knowledge of thousands of them, their properties, interactions, seasonal behavior. Every time a people disappears, or the last elder who holds a particular body of knowledge dies, that knowledge is gone, permanently. No library preserves it because it was never written. Ethnobotanists have been documenting this loss for decades, and the drugs already derived from indigenous knowledge, including Curie's descendants in surgical medicine, suggest the magnitude of what we are losing.
Here's the thing that ties all of this together. The Sentinelese and the Waranani and the Kawahiva and every other isolated people on Earth are not exotic. They are not other. They are not primitive in any meaningful sense of that word. They are running the same software as the rest of us. The program of territorial defense, the program of group cohesion, the program of recognizing us and them, the program of searching for causes and meanings in a chaotic world, the program of passing knowledge through stories, the program of suppressing individuals who threaten collective stability. All of this is in us too. Every single one of these programs is running in every human society on Earth, including yours. The difference is not in the programs. The difference is in the interface, the layer of institutions, laws, technologies, and social norms that channels and regulates these same drives. Strip those layers away, and you find the same thing underneath, in all of us. This is why the Puraha, a small Amazonian group of a few hundred people who have had some outside contact but remain profoundly culturally isolated, produced one of the most destabilizing discoveries in modern linguistics. Daniel Everett, who spent nearly 30 years living among them, found that their language has no numbers, no past tense in the way we understand it, and no recursion, the grammatical feature that Chomsky claimed was a universal property of all human language, a feature he argued was hardwired into the human brain. The Puraha live entirely in the present, not as a spiritual practice, literally. Their language does not allow statements about things not directly witnessed by a living person. No mythology, no creation stories with ancestors from the distant past, only what is observable now. This is not a deficiency. It is a different architecture of reality, and it challenges some of our deepest assumptions about what is universal in human cognition and what is, in fact, a product of particular cultural choices.
This is the question that cannot be avoided. The obvious answer is, leave them alone. But it is not that simple. Their forests are burning. Oil companies are building roads into the Amazonian jungle. Climate change is reshaping the ecosystems their survival depends on. Illegal loggers, gold miners, and drug traffickers don't ask permission and don't respond to arrows. In 2018, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro publicly stated that uncontacted tribes don't exist, that the claim is a fiction invented to prevent resource extraction. This was not a misquote. It was a policy position, and behind it stood the concrete interests of oil, mining, and agribusiness. In the same period, FUNAI, Brazil's indigenous protection agency, suffered dramatic budget cuts. Monitoring posts were closed, territories went unwatched, which means roads are being built, forests are being cleared, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a group of Tagaeri or Kawahiva is moving deeper until there is nowhere left to move. Survival International has spent decades working on a single principle: protect the right to isolation. Don't impose contact. Don't help without being asked. Don't decide for them. Just defend the territory. This sounds simple. In practice, when every square kilometer of virgin forest is worth millions of dollars to an extraction company, it requires legal teeth, political will, and international pressure. Brazil's FUNAI, when funded, monitors isolated territories from the air without any attempt at contact, simply watching, documenting, protecting. India made it a criminal offense to approach North Sentinel Island. Enforcement increased significantly after Chow's death. But laws protect nothing when the institutions enforcing them are defunded.
Let's come back to the question we started with. How did peoples with no contact with each other, separated by oceans and continents and tens of thousands of years, independently arrive at the same weapons, the same social structures, the same solutions? Because the problems were the same, because the human brain is the same, because physics and biology apply equally everywhere on Earth. The convergence is not mysterious. It is the most logical thing in the world. When you face the same challenge with the same instrument, the human mind, you tend to find the same answer. And that convergence tells us something profound about ourselves. These peoples are not a window into our past in the sense of being less developed, less evolved, less human. They are a window into the deep architecture of what we are, the base programs that run beneath every civilization, beneath every legal code, beneath every smartphone screen. The territoriality, the belonging, the meaning embedded in daily necessity, the hostility to the stranger that is, at its core, the memory of what strangers have done. We carry all of it. We have never stopped carrying it.
We have built institutions to manage it, to redirect it, to prevent it from tearing us apart. And those institutions are genuinely valuable. We should not romanticize a life that includes infant mortality, violent conflict, and disease without medicine. But those institutions are also a layer, a covering, and underneath, the code is the same. The Sentinelese man who draws his bow at the sight of a distant boat is running the same program as every border guard, every customs officer, every security system ever built. The logic is identical, only the instruments differ. The Wawarani hunter who knows exactly which bark will reduce a fever in a child is holding knowledge we are in the process of permanently losing, not because it is primitive, but because we have decided that the forest it came from is worth more as timber and oil. These peoples are not relics. They are not curiosities. They are the question that every civilization eventually has to answer. What do we owe to the people who chose a different road? So far, our answer has been nothing. Maybe it is time to reconsider.